The year was 1871, and the frontier sun had a way of beating a man down until his bones felt like they'd been baked in a skillet. Dust hung in the air like a curse, rolling off the hard-packed street and clinging to skin, to cloth, to breath. It was the kind of day when tempers frayed quicker than rope left out in the rain, and every eye in the little town of Redford was drawn to the platform outside the auction house. A woman stood there, tall but thin from lean months, her wrists bound loosely in front. Her dress was the color of dried mud, patched in places where the cloth had worn to threads. Her hair, once the shade of burnished chestnut, was tangled from days in the jailhouse pen. She did not lower her gaze to the crowd. Even when the jeers came, low, ugly murmurs from men who thought their coin gave them the right to spit on dignity, she held her head high. The auctioneer, a wiry fellow with a sunken face and eyes like marbles, tapped the gavel against his palm. "Eliza McGraw," he called, the name carrying across the street like a bell tolling in an empty church. Indentured term for years. Strong worker. Knows her way round a cook fire, and I'm told she can sew tolerable. Start the bid at $1. Silence stretched. A breeze flicked at the hem of her skirt. "Come now, gentlemen," the auctioneer prodded, his voice sharp with forced cheer. "Ain't every day you get a chance at fresh help for the homestead." From a back, a drunk barked a laugh. "Help? Looks like trouble to me." A few heads nodded. They knew the story. Husband dead from a pistol in a saloon quarrel, debts left in his wake. She tried to hold onto their meager cabin, but creditors weren't sentimental. One by one, the small things had been taken: furniture, cooking pots, even the mule. When the last debt came due, the sheriff had put her in holding until the auction. $1, the auctioneer said again, quieter now, but still no one spoke. Eliza's stomach twisted, not from hunger, but from the weight of being unwanted. She told herself she didn't care. She told herself that pride was all she had left, and she'd keep it if it meant standing on that block until the sun dropped behind the rooftops. The sound of boots on wood drew a few glances. From the corner of her eye, she saw him. Tall, broad in the shoulders despite a slight limp, his step uneven on the warped planks of the boardwalk. His coat was dusted from the trail, hat pulled low, but there was no mistaking the sharp lines of his jaw or the rifle slung easy across his back. Daniel Cade had a reputation in Redford. Some said he'd been a lawman once. Others swore he'd run with outlaws until a bullet took his leg out of the game. Whatever the truth, he kept mostly to himself on the spread of land he'd staked 3 years back. Folks knew better than to press him. He stopped at the edge of the platform, eyes steady on the auctioneer. "I'll take her." The crowd stirred. "You'll need to bid, Cade," the auctioneer said, the relief in his voice undercut with wariness. Cade's gaze didn't waver. "I'll give you my best horse. And my name." A hush rolled over the street. No one traded a horse for a bound woman, not unless there was some debt of honor or some madness involved. And a name? In this part of the world, a man's name was the only shield he had. Eliza stared at him, sure she'd misheard. "You don't even know me." "Don't have to," Cade said, voice flat but not unkind. "Town's not safe for a woman on her own." The auctioneer blinked, then nodded quick, afraid Cade might change his mind. The deal was struck in a matter of breaths. The gavel came down, a hollow thud against the post. Cade reached up, cutting the rope at her wrists with a small knife. His touch was careful, almost detached, but she felt the calluses on his fingers, the faint tremor in his grip. "I didn't ask you to do this," she said. "Didn't ask you to thank me," he replied. "Let's go." They walked through the parting crowd, whispers following like horseflies. She caught fragments. Asterisk, why her? Asterisk, asterisk, won't last a week. Asterisk, asterisk, maybe he's gone soft. Asterisk, Cade didn't seem to hear any of it. Outside town, the land opened wide beneath the afternoon light. Dry grass waved in the wind, the earth baked hard and cracked. Cade's horse, a chestnut mare with a proud toss of her head, was tethered just beyond the last hitching post. He swung into the saddle with practiced ease, then offered her a hand. She hesitated. "Where are we going?" "My place." "I'm not." "You can walk if you want." he said, not looking at her. But it's a day and a half to the next town, and there's folks between here and there who'd see you as fair game. Your choice. She took his hand. The mare shifted under their combined weight, but Cade steadied her with a quiet word. They set off, hooves thudding against the packed earth. The first hours passed in near silence. The wind tugged at her hair, and the sun pressed hot against her neck. She tried not to think about what awaited at his ranch or why he'd traded so much for someone he didn't know. By late afternoon, the trail narrowed through a rocky canyon. Shadows stretched long, swallowing the sunlit ground ahead. Cade slowed the mare, eyes scanning the ridge. A sharp metallic click cracked the quiet. Hold it right there. A voice called from the rocks. Two men stepped into view, one tall and wiry, the other broad with a scar down his cheek. Both carried rifles. Nice horse you got there, the scar man said. We'll be taking her. Cade's jaw tightened. Ain't for sale. The wiry one grinned. Didn't sound like we were asking. It happened fast. Cade's hand went to the rifle, the mare dancing under them. A shot split the air, the smell of powder hitting Eliza's nose. Cade fired once, dropping the tall one where he stood. The other cursed, firing wild before scrambling back up the rocks. The ringing in her ears faded to the sound of her own breath, quick and shallow. Cade lowered the rifle, scanning the ridge until he was sure they were gone. Next time, he said, eyes still on the rocks, you'll need to shoot. Her mouth was dry. I'm not. You will be, he cut in. Out here, it's the only way you live. They rode on as the sky darkened, the air cooling with the approach of night. By the time they reached the edge of Cade's land, the first drops of rain began to fall, darkening the dust at their feet. The ranch sat in a shallow valley, framed by weathered fences and a low barn. The house was small but solid, lamplight flickering in the single window. No smoke rose from the chimney. Inside, the air smelled faintly of cedar and old leather. Cade set his hat on a peg, gesturing toward the table. Sit, I'll get the fire going. She sat listening to the soft scrape of matches, the pop of kindling catching. The warmth spread slowly through the room. Over a supper of beans and bread, she asked, Why'd you do it? You could have kept your horse. Your name. He didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was low. Sometimes worth ain't measured in coins. She studied him in the firelight, the lines etched deep around his eyes, the set of his shoulders. She wondered what kind of man traded something so dear for a stranger, and why he looked like someone who'd been carrying a burden for years. A creak sounded from outside. Cade's head lifted, eyes narrowing. You expecting someone? She asked. No, he rose, crossing to the window. In the dim light, she caught the shape of a figure moving near the barn, too far to see clearly, but close enough to stir unease. When he turned back, the warmth in his expression was gone. Stay inside, he said, and keep away from the windows. The door shut behind him, and she sat frozen, the faint sound of rain on the roof drowned by the rush of her own heartbeat. She didn't know who was out there or why, but she knew one thing, whatever she'd stepped into when she left that auction block, it was only just beginning. Dawn broke slow and sullen over Cade's land, the kind of gray light that made the world look hollowed out. Eliza stood at the small kitchen window, hands curled around a chipped mug of coffee that tasted more like burnt earth than anything else. Cade was already outside, moving with that uneven gait toward the barn. He'd said nothing of the figure they'd seen in the rain last night, only that he'd handled it. She wasn't sure what that meant, and wasn't sure she wanted to. When she stepped onto the porch, the morning air bit cold against her skin. Cade was bent over in the dirt, studying something. Boot prints. 2 sets. She realized when she got closer, deep enough to mean the men were heavy, and recent enough that the edges hadn't blurred. They came close, Cade said without looking up. Too close. You think it's the same men from the canyon? He shook his head. No, these boots belong to men who know where they're going. They were looking for something. She wanted to ask what, but the way his jaw tightened stopped her. Instead, she helped him feed the horses, the silence between them filled with the soft clink of buckets and the rustle of hay. By the time the sun pushed over the horizon, a lone rider appeared from the east. He came fast, dust trailing behind like a torn banner. Cade's shoulders tensed as the man drew near, reining in hard by the fence. Troubled, the rider called, voice ragged from a ride. "It's Kerr." Eliza didn't know the name, but the way Cade's hand brushed the butt of his revolver told her enough. He walked out to meet the man, speaking low. "She caught only pieces. Land at 3 days." When Cade came back, his expression was hard as carved stone. "Wyatt Kerr," he said finally, "owns half the cattle in this territory, or thinks he does. He's wanted my land for years. And now he's giving me 3 days to clear out before he comes to take it." She studied his face, trying to see if this was the kind of threat a man could ignore. It wasn't. "Why you?" Cade looked past her to the hills. "Because I said no. And men like Kerr don't take kindly to that." They spent the rest of the morning in a strange rhythm, patching fence, checking water troughs, the weight of what he'd said pressing down between them. Cade showed her how to load a rifle, the brass cartridges shining dull in the light. "You'll need it," he said, pressing the stock into her shoulder. "Pull it tight here. Don't let it kick you." Her hands trembled as she aimed at a tin can on the fence post. The first shot went wide, the crack echoing off the hills. Cade didn't mock her. He just handed her another round. Again. By midday, she hit the can. Once. Cade nodded but didn't smile. Better. They ate lunch on the porch, jerky and bread, the wind carrying the scent of sagebrush. She asked about his limp, but he only said, "Old bullet," and left it at that. She didn't push. There was a shadow in his eyes when he spoke of Kerr, and she knew enough to see the shadow had roots. It was near sundown when the first attack came. The smell of smoke reached them before the shouts. Cade was out of his chair in an instant, grabbing the rifle. Eliza followed him to the yard, heart hammering. The corral was lit up like a funeral pyre, flames climbing the rails, sparks leaping into the dry air. Horses screamed, throwing themselves against the gates. 2 riders were just shadows against the fire, tossing oil before spurring off into the dark. "Get water," Cade barked, and she ran, the buckets heavy, the smoke clawing at her throat. He fought to free the horses, his limp slowing him but not stopping him. The heat was a living thing pressing against her skin, making her eyes stream. She worked beside him without thinking, passing bucket after bucket, until the fire hissed and spit itself into a smolder. When it was over, Cade was coughing, soot streaking his face. One of the colts was limping, its flank burned. Eliza knelt beside it, whispering low until it stopped shivering. "You didn't have to help," Cade said, voice rough. She looked up at him, still catching her breath. "I wasn't about to watch everything burn." He studied her for a moment, then nodded once. "You did good." They stayed up late, watching the horizon as if expecting more riders. Somewhere between the silence and the steady crackle of the hearth, Eliza told him about her husband. How he'd drunk away what little they had, how his debts had dragged her down with him. Cade listened without interrupting, his face unreadable. "Sounds like he didn't deserve you," he said when she finished. "That's not the way folks in town see it. Town's got a way of seeing what it wants." The next morning, a note was nailed to the barn door. The words were scrawled in a rough hand. Asterisk 3 days. Leave or be carried out. Asterisk. Cade tore it down without a word. He spent the day checking rifles, counting ammunition. Eliza watched him, a question turning over in her mind. Why not just leave? "This land's mine," he said simply, "and I don't give it up to thieves." That night, she dreamed of fire again. Only this time, it was the house, and Cade was nowhere in sight. She woke before dawn, the sound of wind in the chimney like far-off voices. 2 more riders passed along the ridge that morning. Cade watched them until they were specks, his jaw clenched. Eliza found herself loading cartridges without being asked. Her hands were steadier now. "You sure you want to be part of this?" Cade asked, glancing at her. She thought about it. About the auction block, the jeers, the feeling of being worth less than the dust under her boots. "I'm tired of running," she said. A flicker of something, respect, maybe, passed over his face. By midday, they were repairing the barn roof when a single shot cracked the quiet. The bullet hit the post beside Cade's head, splintering wood. They dropped down, crawling to cover. "Kerr's boys," Cade muttered, testing the water. The next hours were a tense waiting game. No more shots came, but the message was clear. They were being watched. When night fell, the hills seemed closer, darker, as if they'd grown teeth. They ate in near silence, both listening for sounds beyond the walls. It was Eliza who broke it. "You said Kerrs wanted your land for years. Why?" Cade stared into the fire. "My wife was killed over it. Kerr's men claimed she got in the way of a fence-line dispute." His voice was flat, but the muscle in his jaw worked. "I stayed. Figured the land was the only piece of her I had left." Eliza didn't know what to say. She reached for her cup, her fingers brushing his. He didn't pull away. The wind outside rose, rattling the shutters. Cade stood, checking the lock on the door. 3 days, he said, almost to himself. She knew, then, that no matter what happened, they weren't going to run. When the last lamp was out and the fire burned low, Eliza lay awake, listening to the night. Somewhere far off, a horse whinnied. She closed her eyes, but the sound stayed with her as steady and certain as the beat of her own heart. The sky was the color of cold steel when Cade stepped outside, his boots grinding on the frost-hardened dirt. Eliza watched from the doorway, her shawl wrapped tight around her shoulders. The air was sharp enough to bite, and in it she could smell something faint but certain, dust carried from a distance by riders. Cade was already scanning the hills, his hand resting on the worn grip of his Colt. "They're coming," he said. Her stomach tightened. "Today?" He nodded once. "Today." No more talk of 3 days. No more warnings nailed to the barn. This was the end of the waiting. Cade moved with quiet efficiency, checking the rifles laid out on the table inside. He slid cartridges into his coat pocket, then passed her a Winchester. She took it without hesitation, the weight familiar now. Her palms no longer sweated at the touch of the steel. "Stay low. Don't waste shots," he told her. "You're not getting rid of me," she replied. A faint smile touched the corner of his mouth. "Wasn't planning to." By mid-morning, a dust cloud swelled on the horizon. Shapes emerged, 6 riders, spread in a loose line, moving with the easy confidence of men who thought they'd already won. At the front was a broad-shouldered man in a black coat, the sun flashing off the silver conchos on his saddle. Even at a distance, the arrogance was plain. "Wyatt Kerr," Cade murmured. The riders slowed when they reached the edge of the yard. Kerr swung down from his horse, his boots crunching on the cold ground. "Cade," he called, voice like gravel. "I've been patient." "You've been a thief," Cade shot back. Kerr's smile didn't reach his eyes. "I've been giving you a chance to walk away. You've got no kin, no hired hands. Just you and her." His gaze slid to Eliza, slow and deliberate. Something in her went cold, but she didn't flinch. "This land's mine," Cade said. "Ain't for sale." Kerr sighed, as though disappointed in a child. "Then I'll take it off your corpse." He raised his hand. Gunfire cracked the air. Cade fired first, dropping one of Kerr's men before the others could spread out. Bullets tore into the fence posts with splintering. Eliza ducked behind the trough, aiming at the riders circling to flank Cade. She squeezed the trigger. The man tumbled from the saddle, his hat flying. Smoke and the stench of gunpowder filled the yard. Cade moved with a predator's patience, each shot deliberate. Kerr's men pressed harder, firing from behind saddles, shouting curses over the din. A bullet slammed into the doorframe inches from Eliza's head. She rolled into the shadow of the porch, heart pounding, and reloaded with clumsy speed. Cade shouted her name, but before she could answer, she saw movement, a rider creeping along the barn wall, rifle raised at Cade's back. Without thinking, she aimed and fired. The man's body jerked and crumpled into the dirt. Cade glanced her way, his eyes sharp with something she couldn't name. Gratitude, maybe, or trust. The fight surged again. One of Kerr's men lobbed a torch toward the house. Flames licked at the porch boards. Eliza kicked it away, the fire searing her skirt. She didn't feel it until later. Kerr himself came forward now, revolver in hand, firing as he advanced. Cade met him halfway, both men moving in a deadly dance between the scattered cover of barrels and fence rails. The exchange was brutal, fast, hard, without mercy. A shout from behind drew Eliza's attention. Two more riders, late arrivals, charging straight for the corral. Thinking quick, she ran for the barn, throwing open the gate and slapping the horses hard on their flanks. They bolted, a storm of hooves and muscle, scattering the oncoming men. One was thrown, the other barely clinging to his saddle as the chaos tore through Kerr's line. The distraction was enough. Cade's shot caught Kerr high in the chest, spinning him back into the dust. He landed hard, his revolver slipping from his hand. Silence followed, heavy and sudden. The surviving men stared for breath, then wheeled their horses and rode hard for the hills, leaving their fallen behind. Cade approached Kerr, who lay, gasping, blood blooming dark through his coat. Kerr's eyes flicked to Eliza. "You think you've won," he rasped. Cade crouched beside him. "No," he said quietly. "I just think you're done." Kerr's last breath rattled out, and the wind carried it away. Eliza stood still, the rifle hanging loose at her side. Her ears rang, but beneath it she could hear her own heartbeat slowing. The fire on the porch had died to embers, the smoke curling upward into the cold sky. Cade straightened, his face unreadable. "It's over." "Is it?" she asked. "For now." They worked in silence to gather the dead, burying them on the far edge of the property. Cade dug the graves himself despite the limp, the shovel biting into the frozen ground with stubborn rhythm. Eliza hauled stones to mark them, her burned skirt catching the wind. When the last mound was covered, they stood together, looking at the churned earth. "Town will hear about this," Cade said. "Some will call it justice. Others won't." She glanced at him. "And you?" "I call it surviving." They walked back to the house as the sun dipped low, painting the land in blood-red light. Inside, Cade poured 2 mugs of coffee, sliding one toward her. "You don't have to stay," he said. "Name or no name, you're free to go." Eliza took the mug, feeling the warmth seep into her hands. She thought of the auction block, the jeers, the emptiness of having nowhere to belong. She thought of the smoke and the gunfire, the way Cade had stood between her and the men who would have taken everything. "I'm not going anywhere," she said. Cade met her eyes, searching for something. Whatever he found, it made the lines at the corner soften. "Then we've got work to do. Fences to mend. Stock to replace." She smiled faintly. "I reckon we do." The days that followed were quiet in the way winter days often are. Cold mornings, long hours, the sound of hammer and saw carrying over the land. The scars on the yard and buildings healed slow, but they healed, and somewhere in the mending of the ranch, something else began to knit back together between them. One evening, as they rode the fence line, the hills bathed in gold, Cade reined in to look over the land. "Never figured I'd have someone riding with me again," he said. Eliza turned in the saddle to meet his gaze. "Never figured I'd be worth riding with." "You were wrong," he said simply. The wind stirred the grass, whispering low. She let the words settle, not needing to fill the silence. By the time they reached the barn, the first stars were pricking the dark. Cade swung down, offering her a hand. She took it, feeling the strength in his grip, the steadiness that had anchored them both through fire and lead. Inside, the lamplight was warm, the smell of supper rich in the air. Outside, the land stretched wide and unbroken, theirs to keep, at least for now. And in the quiet that followed, she understood something she hadn't on the day she stood on that platform in town. Worth wasn't something the world gave you. It was something you decided for yourself, and sometimes it took another soul to remind you of it. The wind had a restless sound that morning, whispering through the bare branches like it knew something the earth hadn't yet decided to tell. Cade stood at the porch rail, rolling a match between his fingers, his gaze fixed on the horizon. Eliza came out with 2 steaming mugs, setting one beside him. He didn't take it. "They're not finished," he said. She didn't need to ask who. The quiet since Kerr's death had been too neat, too measured. There'd been no lawmen riding out, no hot-headed sons coming to avenge him, no new claims on the land. That kind of stillness in the West usually meant one thing: trouble was biding its time. They'll send someone else, Cade continued. Kerr had partners, men who don't like losing. Eliza sipped her coffee, the heat biting her tongue. Then we wait for them. He glanced at her, eyes narrowing slightly as if weighing her resolve. You sure? I'm tired of running, she said. And this place, it's the first that's felt like mine too. A faint nod. No smile. Cade wasn't a man who smiled easy. But there was a steadiness in his face now, something that told her words had struck home. By midday, clouds gathered heavy over the hills. Cade worked on reinforcing the barn door with iron hinges, while Eliza sorted through supplies, counting ammunition, setting aside enough food to last a siege. She moved with the same grim purpose as him, the same quiet understanding that what was coming would be bad and close. It was late afternoon when a lone rider appeared on the ridge. Tall, in the saddle, he didn't bother to mask his approach, his black coat snapping in the wind. Cade's shoulders tightened as the man came down into the yard. The rider dismounted slow, his boots striking the ground with deliberate weight. He was younger than Cade, but there was a coldness in his eyes that had nothing to do with years. Name's Clay Maddox, he said, voice even. Kerr was my uncle. Cade didn't move from where he stood. Your uncle was a thief and a killer. And you killed him. Maddox's gaze slid to Eliza, lingering a heartbeat too long. Word in town says you've got yourself a partner now. Eliza felt the weight of it, the threat braided into his tone. If you've come for the land, you're wasting your ride, she said. He chuckled low. Not here for the land. Here for you. Payment for what Cade took from my blood? Cade stepped forward, the air between them tightening. She's not part of this. Maddox's mouth curved into something cruel. Everything's part of this. The move was sudden, his hand going for the revolver, Cade's faster. But Maddox was already ducking behind his horse, returning fire. The first shot ripped the corner of the barn, splinters flying. Eliza dropped to the ground, rolling toward the stack of feed sacks for cover. Two more riders appeared from behind the ridge, rifles already up. Cade fired twice, one man tumbling from his saddle, the other wheeling off to circle toward the house. Eliza crawled to the porch, her fingers wrapping around the Winchester. She fired at the rider swinging wide, the recoil jarring her shoulder. He shouted and veered off, retreating behind the water trough. The yard filled with the sharp, hot stink of gunpowder, the crack of shots echoing off the hills. Cade moved with methodical precision, but Maddox was quick, using the horse as moving cover, forcing Cade to adjust with each breath. A bullet slammed into the porch post beside Eliza's head, the shock of it ringing in her ears. She ducked, reloaded, and fired back, this time hitting Maddox's horse. The animal screamed and bucked, throwing him hard into the dirt. Cade was on him in seconds, the two men hitting the ground in a brutal tangle of fists and knees. Eliza watched for a moment, torn between moving in and holding cover. Maddox was fast, but Cade fought with the weight of someone who'd survived worse. Maddox landed a blow that split Cade's lip, then scrambled for his fallen revolver. Cade kicked it away, but in the scuffle Maddox pulled a knife, the blade flashing in the dying light. Eliza's rifle was empty. She grabbed the Colt from Cade's saddle and ran forward, boots slipping in the churned mud. Maddox raised the knife high. She didn't think, just aimed and fired. The sound was deafening up close. Maddox staggered back, the knife clattering from his grip. He hit the ground and didn't move. For a long moment, all she heard was her own breathing. Cade stood over Maddox, chest heaving, blood at the corner of his mouth. His eyes found hers, and whatever he meant to say got lost in the weight of the moment. The last of Maddox's men was gone, dust trailing toward the far hills. The yard smelled of smoke and blood. The sky, above turning the color of bruised steel. They buried Maddox beside his uncle, the graves unmarked save for the churned earth. Neither of them spoke during the digging. Words felt too thin for the work at hand. Back in the house, Cade cleaned his lip with a strip of cloth, wincing only slightly. You didn't hesitate, he said finally. You didn't give me a reason to, she replied. He studied her, and for the first time she thought she saw something like pride in his eyes. That man would have killed you, she said quietly. Maybe, Kate admitted, or you. They sat at the table with the lamplight casting long shadows against the walls. Outside, the wind had shifted, carrying the smell of wet earth. This isn't over, Cade said. Men like Maddox, they always have more behind them. We'll hear from another before long. Eliza met his gaze, steady. Then we'll deal with it when it comes. Something eased in his face at that. Not relief, not quite trust, something deeper, born from shared bloodshed and stubborn survival. The next day was spent repairing what the fight had broken: the porch post, the barn wall, the fence line where the horses had scattered. Eliza worked beside Cade without complaint, her muscles aching in ways that felt almost good, earned. In the afternoon, they rode the far pasture. The air was clean after the storm, the grass glistening where frost still clung. Cade reined in at the ridge, looking out over the land that rolled away toward the horizon. This is all I've got, he said, quietly. It's worth fighting for. She looked at him, then at the land, and thought of the day she'd stood on that auction block, empty-handed, unclaimed, stripped of worth in the eyes of every man there. It's worth fighting for because it's yours, she said, and because you gave me a place in it. Cade didn't answer right away, just watched the light shift across the hills. You've got a choice, Eliza. Always have. You want to leave, I won't hold you. She turned her horse toward him. And if I stay? Then we ride this out together, whatever comes. There was no hesitation in her. Then I stay. They headed back as the sun began to drop, the sky turning gold and copper. Cade's silhouette was steady in the saddle, the wind tugging at the brim of his hat. She felt something settle inside her, like a piece of herself had found its place. That night, over a simple supper, they spoke little. Words weren't needed. Outside, the coyotes called from the hills, their voices carrying across the cold land. Cade set his rifle within easy reach, and Eliza did the same. When the lamp was turned low, the house felt small against the vast dark outside, but it was theirs. And for the first time since she'd stepped off that auction block, Eliza felt the shape of her life changing, not by the hand of others, but by her own choosing. Somewhere far off, another wind was already gathering, another fight waiting down the trail. But for now, there was quiet, and the knowledge that whatever came, they would face it side by side. The kind of thing the old storytellers would say, that makes a life worth living, and worth defending until the last bullet spent.